It's the week ending Saturday the 16th of March, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Parliament rejecting a no-deal Brexit, but also for a second time, Theresa May's deal, Boeing grounding its latest fleet of planes amid safety fears, and 4 British teams making it to the quarterfinals of the Champions League. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are boss man Holden Frith, resident renegade Jamie Timson, and from the week junior, well, why not, Felicity Capon. Holden, you're starting the show this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This is the week concerned citizens had something else to be concerned about.
911, what is your emergency?
I'm in Prospect Park right now, by the playground. There's a man here. He just pulled out a gun.
Okay, ma'am, we're sending someone right away.
You ready to go to the park?
78 Eddie on the air.
Eddie, go central.
1010, respond to male with firearm near Prospect Park Playground. I'm heading west towards park entrance. Check and advise.
10-4 Central. I'm on my way.
There was a promotional video for Citizen, an app that launched back in 2016. But Holden, why is it your story today?
It's just been launched in Los Angeles, having previously been available in a few other US cities. Well, its stated aim is to keep people safe, or at least keep its users safe, by letting them know of crimes as they happen and other emergencies wherever they happen to be via the location that it determines from your mobile phone.
And how does it know about all of these incidents?
It scans police radios, which in the US are publicly available in most of the country, and also other public safety alerts. And it does this with a mix of voice recognition software and also some human staff who are employed to kind of trawl through all of these reports and compile them into alerts.
Okay. Sounds like a relatively useful tool. Are you about to tell us that this is going to, bring about the end of the world because people are paranoid and they're going to end up being fearful all the time, or what?
Yeah, I think, the example, essentially, yes. The example they give is an alert about a gunman spotted in a playground, and that's the sort of thing that, of course, you would want to hear about if it was somewhere close to you. But I think my concern about it is that it's going to create a lot more anxiety than it is useful information. And then you can look on their website and see a lot of the alerts that are being issued, in real time, and a lot of them are quite vague. It's sort of an intruder has been seen going into this unnamed building on a street, or it's things that have already happened. So an armed robbery has been reported 20 minutes ago. And it's because it's things that are around you. It's just going to create this sort of sense of anxiety about things you have no real control over and probably would not really derive any benefit from knowing about.
But Felicity, that's what journalism does as well, isn't it? I mean, the media report on things that are happening that are bad things because that's what makes them news. And a lot of people use Twitter, for example, look to that for those kinds of real-time updates because it is news, whether it's nice to know about or not. So why not have a more reliable source that says, we've just noticed this crime's happening next door? That is tailored personal news to you, isn't it? It's your choice whether to read it or not.
Yeah, but I think what's weird about this one, though, is I think the more you know about crimes going on around you, the more, you're going to get more paranoid and anxious, but also kind of fears of vigilantism, that you're going to sort of feel that maybe you could be a hero and sort of get involved. I'm not sure everyone would necessarily move away from the crime and try and avoid it. Some people might try and launch themselves into it and sort of try and save the day. And I think also it made me think of the so-called terror attack of Oxford Street in 2017, which is obviously quite close to our offices, when this terror attack, which was actually turned out to just be an altercation, there was sort of mass hysteria that had been massively generated by social media. Olly Mann, and social media in general, and actually the role of journalists and reporting in sort of real time and live streaming. You had these ridiculous people sort of running through shopping centres going, right now I'm running for my life away from a group of terrorists, and the whole thing turned out to be nonsense.
Jamie, just to clarify for those who don't remember, Olly Mann was, I believe, in a toilet in Selfridges.
He was in Selfridges, and he tweeted that there had been shooting in Selfridges and that everyone should get themselves to a safe place, he was saying, from his safe place, and it turned out that none of that was true.
And it's that mass hysteria that made me think of this story, that it's only going to fuel it and become much, much more.
It gathers together, doesn't it, Holden, real footage? I mean, it can't be authenticated, of course, but footage that they know location-wise, has come from that place. So in that sense, it might be more reliable than other social media because the only footage that's being uploaded, even if it is fake, is at least from the place where the incident's supposed to be happening.
Yes, and I suppose they can tally that with police reports, which again could be hoaxed. You know, people could phone in false reports, but there's slightly more verification going on here than otherwise. But that doesn't get around the issue of vigilantism. And actually, this app, when it was originally launched, did launch under the name Vigilante. So that
I can see why they changed that.
Indeed, although it did the change from Vigilante to Citizen did remind me of the Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns tells Chief Wiggum about the corpse hatch in his office and then hastily says, "Did I say corpse hatch? I meant innocence tube."
I mean, regardless of branding, Jamie, is this something that you would feel inclined to use if it came to London?
I think no. I think it is one of those things where if you were to be told at all times, you know, what exactly was going on around you and the crimes that were there, I don't think it would do much for my mental health. Interestingly, John Ronson spoke about this very app on the Russell Brand podcast, and he was saying that it's actually turned him. I mean, he's already an anxious person, but he said that it was turned him into a nervous wreck, particularly about the number of bits of scaffolding that fall on people's heads. And he was just like, if I was you, I would go nowhere near scaffolding because of how much he learns from this app that's happening.
But is that not useful information?
I mean, maybe from a public warning, so, you know, maybe we need better scaffolders. But I think more importantly than just the scaffolding issue is the idea that poorer neighbourhoods will obviously be adversely affected by this. And if you are saying that what you want to do is avoid places where crimes are taking place, you could end up with real kind of barren lands. And there are some really good effects of having people walk past crimes, you know, actively walk into a situation where perhaps things might change because there are pedestrians walking by. And yes, I mean, there are a chance that they would put themselves in danger, but there is also a positive effect. And what you don't want is to have like poor neighbourhoods being completely avoided by everyone else thanks to the work of an app.
And the word citizen, which is the new name for the app, does sort of hint at citizen journalism, doesn't it? This idea that if you see something happening, it's almost your duty to film it and report it, not necessarily get involved, but to stand there and take your phone out and take a picture of it. Is that a healthy thing to do, Felicity? Because I think there are two sides to that.
Maybe in the context of cuts to local journalism anyway, that why not have people on the street sort of filling that role, and especially I suppose in the context of this wave of knife crimes and stabbings that we're seeing and this huge row over police cuts and austerity measures and all that sort of thing, maybe it does make sense. But I don't know, I just don't have the time. I don't think I really want to get involved in trying to have to, you know, solve crimes or report crimes every single day. And I'm sure most people don't. I don't want to get away from social media. I don't want another app on my phone.
Have any of you actually been in a situation where you felt that impulse, though, to reach into your phone and film something that's happening around you? Because it has happened to me.
Does it have to be a crime? There was a pheasant on Tottenham Court Road.
maybe that's...
And everyone was filming this pheasant because no one knew where the pheasant came from. What do you mean
big?
how big?
How big was the pheasant?
It was
normal sized.
Just a normal sized average pheasant.
That's an app, though, I would like. A kind of an alert to inexplicable wildlife sightings in urban
Well,
situations.
it's happened to me, so I'll talk about it then. And I'm aware that with this anecdote, I'm descending into parody, but anyway, it's true. When the London riots were happening, I was having afternoon tea in a hotel in London.
Of course you were. Of course you were.
It was for my friend Stag Do, and he's a socialist, but we were having afternoon tea. And we were in a balcony overlooking the riots as they happened down Piccadilly. I just had this urge, because I had this incredible view of what was going on the street, and no one wanted to go out on the street in case it got dangerous. I just had this urge to reach into my pocket and film it, and I had to really suppress that urge because I was supposed to be having fun with my friend for his Stag Do. So I didn't. But I really felt it. I felt like I had a duty to somehow record this footage, and I couldn't quite locate where that was coming from in my brain. It wasn't about the fact that I work in the media. It was a feeling as a citizen that I should record this because I could.
There have been studies done after terrorist attacks when people start to film, and it seems counterintuitive in a way that people are in danger and yet their instinct is to get out a phone and start filming. And apparently it can give you I don't know if this was your particular motive when you were on the balcony of the Ritz watching the London riots.
I'll let you use the Ritz as a stand-in.
It
was a much finer establishment than that.
Apparently it gives people a sense of control and some sort of power over their destiny if they can take some sort of action, even if that action is just to take out a phone. And
there is also the app people, the people behind the app have brought out this story that might be semi-apocryphal because it does make the app sound like it was a really great thing. But there was on the second day that it launched in Baltimore, there was a police arresting a black man, and the app told the people in the nearby area, and they came and started recording what was going on using the app. And the man who was being arrested said that the police's behaviour completely changed once they saw that they were being recorded. And he got up and told them, I think you might have just saved my life. Which does sound apocryphal when you're trying to sell an app, but it's that example of those things that could be positive.
Yeah, and it's used as an example, isn't it? Because that in that instance, it sounds like, and we weren't there, but it sounds like probably the police's actions were more just as a result of the crowd turning up. But how have the police reacted generally to the existence of this app? Holden, I mean, do they think this is, of assistance that the public can turn up whilst they're trying to solve crimes?
The initial reaction was very negative and led to the app being withdrawn from the App Store after just 48 hours. I'm not sure, I haven't seen a reaction since, but I would imagine that most police forces aren't too keen on, either their actions being policed by citizens or actually just bystanders sort of showing up whenever there's a reported incident.
OK, and for those of us who are listening to this think I'd actually like to have a play on this, you can't if you're living in the UK, right? It's only in America at the moment.
That's right. It's just New York, LA, San Francisco and Baltimore at the moment. I think partly the issue here is that police radios are encrypted and in fact it's illegal to listen in on them, so it seems that it's unlikely to come over here soon.
OK, thank you, Holden. Jamie, you're up next after this. Jamie Timson, your time has come. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This was the week an ailing leader clung on to power, but not that one.
When Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika abandoned his bid for a fifth term in office, there were celebrations, but they were short-lived. On Monday evening, the demonstrators were euphoric. Then the reality set in. While Bouteflika outlined a series of steps which he hopes would shape Algeria's future, he announced that next month's election would be delayed. But Bouteflika would remain in power until further notice. On Tuesday, protesters were still out on the streets.
That was Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoon reporting on the latest goings-on in Algeria. Jamie, what is going on in Algeria?
Yeah, so Algeria, there's been kind of 3 weeks of protest against President Bouteflika, who is an 83-year-old in a country in which 2/3 are under 30, half are under 25. President Bouteflika, who by many accounts is something of a puppet leader, and the country is actually being run by Le Pouvoir, who are known as the Power, which is a kind of clique of business leaders and generals. And this week he finally agreed to stand down.
And was that in response to protest of the type we were hearing?
Yes. So, I mean, a lot of the time, more recently, there has been struggles with unemployment in Algeria. I mean, it's a common thread, really, of not enough jobs. The GDP has decreased. They obviously have huge amounts of oil reserves and gas available to them, but the kind of oil price has dropped, and so there have been problems. But mainly it is just that the young country of Algeria doesn't want to be led for a fifth term by an 83-year-old, puppet, effectively. Unfortunately, he's announced that he wants to delay the next election while they try to find a replacement for him. But this hasn't gone down well with young people who have started using the slogan, "Leave means leave." And we've all heard that before, haven't we?
We all know where that leads, except we don't. OK, so there's a big nationwide protest movement. There's a leader that seems out of touch with the younger demographic. It all seems a bit Arab Spring-ish. And this is the biggest protest movement in that region since the Arab Spring, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, having looked at what happened in Tunisia and what happened in Egypt, what do you think this is leading to? I mean,
it's actually a really interesting question, because I think what has proven from, the past 8 years since the Arab Spring is that while it is easy to get rid of the person in charge, it's actually much harder to get rid of the regime. If you look at Sisi in Egypt and also in Tunisia, they are having the same problems again of the people that they worked so hard to get rid of. Algeria is actually a slightly different case in point, because they went through a really bloody civil war. and the cabal, the pouvoir, have been using the threat of civil war and destability and held it over to stop protests from happening. So this is actually quite a big change for Algerians.
Holden.
Yeah, I've read conflicting takes on the relationship between these protests and the Arab Spring. And one analyst called Yasmina Alouche on Al Arabi's tried to draw quite a sharp distinction between the two and saying that it's actually foreign commentators who can only really see protest movements in Arab countries through the lens of the Arab Spring. And in fact, these protests are much more distinct to the national history of Algeria and particularly the civil war, and that was used by Bouteflika as a kind of implied threat to his people, that unless you trust me and unless you trust the authorities to keep a lid on all forms of protest, then we will tip back into what was known as the Black Decade, that very long, bloody civil war. But now you've got a whole generation who's come through who don't have the memories of the conflict of that time, and so for them the frustrations of daily life mean that it's worth taking that risk.
And Felicity, what do you think is the best way for not necessarily just an Algerian leader but any leader to reach an alienated younger demographic like that? You know, if you've clung on to power for so long, how can you replenish it?
Don't try and run for a fifth term when you're 85. I mean, this guy, he hasn't made a speech in 6 years. The last time he ran for office in 2014, he failed to make an appearance on the campaign trail. It's a country that is desperately crying out for rejuvenation. I think regardless of whether there's a sort of tangible link between the Arab Spring and what's going on in Algeria, I think it's undeniable that you're seeing a rising sense of injustice, mostly among a sort of youthful, more urbanised, more better informed population, which is what you had in the Arab Spring. So whether it sort of fizzles out or whether it leads to sort of violent repression from the state, I think it's undeniable that this is a huge movement for Algeria. And I think the sort of him trying to go for a fifth term has sort of woken Algeria from a state of apathy, perhaps, that it was kind of the odd one out in the Arab Spring, that because of its history it wasn't going to have these protests because it has such dark memories. But I think now this is a turning point. But I think it's interesting because, I mean, I think there are some, like Holden was saying, there are conflicting accounts of what this sort of means. And there was an article in the Financial Times which was actually very sort of hopeful and positive and saying, you know, there are these echoes of the Arab uprisings reverberating in Algeria right now. And it's kind of, this article was suggesting that it was a symbol of rising resistance that you're seeing not only in Algeria, but you're seeing it in Malaysia. They got rid of their corrupt president last year, I believe. Ethiopia, the Prime Minister, reformist Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. You could look at Venezuela, you know, the protests against Maduro, the sort of, and also close to Algeria, I suppose you've got Sudan, protests against the 3-decade rule there of Omar al-Bashir. So I guess the article was trying to sort of take a hopeful look that is authoritarianism maybe slightly in decline.
Regardless of the specific circumstances that led the protests, the Arab Spring does sort of loom over them, and it seems that the protesters have been quite careful to distinguish what they're doing from the Arab Spring, partly because in most cases that did lead to such a violent backlash. But they've mostly been very careful to make specific requests about no fifth term for Bouteflika, and they've avoided slogans like relating to overthrowing the state, and they've tried to narrow the focus of what they're aiming for.
Of a soft spring.
Good. I think that, like, as well with the Algerian kind of feeling towards Bouteflika, part of the reason that the Arab Spring didn't take off so much in Algeria was because Bouteflika reacted. You know, he dropped the price of food, and rather than doubling down and cracking down, he actually made their lives easier. And I think there is a kind of semblance, you know, on what Felicity was saying about like hope for Algeria, is that they are a country and a population that at least have a better relationship with those in charge. You know, it's not fully a democracy, but it's not an autocratic state either. You are allowed to criticise the intelligence services. You are allowed to criticise the government in cafes. You know, it isn't that. So there is a hope that if these kind of protests can bring about like actual change in the country, it could be used to, you know, to spark other places.
Felicity.
But I think there's also parallels possibly between Algeria and Venezuela, in that I feel like both countries, I mean, it's more apparent and extreme in Venezuela, but Algeria, actually, there should be better opportunities for young people, and it's absolutely unbelievable that so many young people are unemployed there. Algeria is sort of unique in that in terms of its landmass, it's Africa's largest country. It commands a vast length of the Mediterranean coastline and has the largest reserves of oil and gas and is a leading gas exporter to Europe. And unlike Tunisia and Morocco, it just hasn't managed to tap into attracting foreign tourists to the country in the same way that they have. So there are this kind of rising resentment that, hang on, it shouldn't be this difficult to sort of live and make a living in Algeria. I think you're now starting to see that boil over.
OK, but lots of shoulds and coulds coming from everyone here. What do you think is actually going to happen to Bouteflika, first of all, Jamie?
I mean, I think he will have to step down. I mean, it's fairly clear that he's not going to be alive for much longer. I struggle to believe that the cabal, the pouvoir, will relinquish their role, but it's possible that hopefully they will pick someone that's younger, that can invigorate the population and actually, put Algeria back into a better state.
So, and what do you think will happen to Algeria?
Well, I mean, I think that they'll...
What does it look like in 10 years' time?
As much as anyone can make predictions on this show, I at least hope that we'll end up in a situation where unemployment is at kind of much better levels and that there's more bigger roles for young people in that country. OK,
but again, that word hope. I mean, again, if you look at the Arab Spring and what happened in those countries, Holden, would you make a prediction based on hope or would you be rather more grim?
I would probably be somewhat more sceptical, partly because we talked about the oil reserves that the country has, but I think part of the reason that Bouteflika hasn't been able to buy off support in the way that he did in 2011 is that the oil price is half now what it is then. So even if you get rid of him, whoever replaces him is not going to have much economic room for manoeuvre to make reforms. So if I was going to make a prediction, it would be a slightly more depressing one of looking to parallels in Zimbabwe, where you maybe make some changes and there may well be positives still to come, but there's going to be a lot of the old regime within whatever new model emerges too.
OK, well, nonetheless, Jamie, thank you. I'm sure all of us learnt more about Algeria in the last 10 minutes than we knew at the start of the podcast. One last story to come after this. And so, finally this week, it's Felicity. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
No time for baby steps in the fight against climate change.
So Friday I have school and I'm meant to be there in lessons, but instead I'm going to leave school with my friends and bring posters and make a ruckus about climate change.
These students are going on strike to protest against climate change.
Missing school is not a decision that I think most of us have taken lightly because education is so important, but when it's coming so close to the point of it becoming irreversible that we really have to do something now.
That was a BBC News feature covering the recent student strike over climate change. Felicity, climate change is fast becoming your personal cause on the show. What is the climate change story you would like to bring us this week?
It's not funny. You've got to take this seriously. The story this week is an article in The Guardian by Al Hunt about a movement known as the BirthStrikers. BirthStrike is a voluntary organisation set up by a woman called Blythe Pepino for women and men who've decided not to have children in response to climate breakdown and the collapse of civilization. So just really cheerful.
Why would they do that? Yeah. Why would they decide not to have kids?
It's sort of two-pronged, I think. The idea is that having children is exploiting the planet's resources, so population control is something that we need to get on top of if we're going to fight climate change. But secondly, I suppose the idea that if it is irreversible and there's only so much we can do to mitigate it and we are just heading to disaster, then why on earth would you bring a child into this world when you can't possibly determine that the future that they're going to have is going to be a good one?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if you pose that question to parents, they would readily have an answer to that question. But by definition, these people, of course, aren't parents. So they've decided not to have kids. Do you get the sense that they've done that basically to get the publicity, to get the attraction so that, they can write and talk about climate change in the newspapers and in the media? Or whether this really is a real lifestyle choice for them? I am not going to have kids.
Of course it is. It's a huge choice.
Well, don't you say, of course, is what if they change their mind in 2 years' time? That might always be part of the plan.
No, I think it is a real huge personal choice to say I'm not going to have children. And it's really sad. It's really tragic to say because a lot of the people who are interviewed in the article, they wanted to have kids. They've met someone, they were excited to have a family, but are saying I really don't. And some have got sterilised. So it's a serious life choice to say I'm not going to bring children into this world is huge. But I think they're very clear on that. Their aim isn't to discourage other people from having children or to condemn people who already do have children, but it's a way of communicating the urgency and the emergency of what's going on.
But in your position at the Week Junior, and we talked about this last time you were on, actually you're in touch with an audience who are passionate about climate change, who are children. So there's an irony there, isn't there? Like, if you want to change something, it's actually young people who seem to be making a difference on climate change.
Because they know it's their future, and that all the adults who are in charge of the world, it's not really going to affect them so much. So I think kids it's this horrible, dawning realisation that they're going to have to be the ones to do something, because it is.
So how can the answer be not
future.
to have more children there to do it?
I hate the argument. I'm, as editor of the Week Junior, I'm really impressed to see, and there's going to be a huge strike tomorrow, actually. It's a global protest of kids around the world, and that's really impressive and it's great to see. But I hate this kind of complacency from adults who say, oh, they're the ones who are going to sort everything out, they're going to fix it, don't worry, we can keep on living the lifestyles that we're all accustomed to and used to, because this generation are going to come up and sort everything out. That's sheer complacency. It's putting a massive burden and pressure on kids who already have to deal with so much, whether it's social media and mental health and all the stresses of living in the 21st century. They're now being told, oh, and one more final thing, you've got to save the planet. I think that's just awful.
Holden, do you have sympathy with people who would say, I'm not going to have kids to protect the future of the planet?
I don't know what to make of this story. I think there's probably a huge mix of motives and emotions going on here and feeding into this decision. And I did wonder if, and I may be wrong about this, but I did wonder if for some people it's actually more of a justification for a sort of deep desire not to have children at all. And I think that's still quite a difficult thing for some people to express. And so if you are casting around for reasons, perhaps unconsciously, this might be a way of turning what can seem like a selfish act or selfish decision into something that's more of a selfless act.
I think it's odd to try and look beyond people who are making a decision and telling you the reason that they're making a decision to try and search for something that other than what they're saying. Like, I don't think you would do that in other situations.
Yeah, why can't you just take it at face value?
And I think that, like, if I'm honest, I'm a big fan of direct action, obviously, as I've said before on the podcast, and I think this is probably one of the biggest options of direct action that there is in this world. I think that if it means that saying that I'm not going to have a child maybe changes the opinion of like 5 people in your friendship group, that makes you understand, then hopefully that will work and spread out from there. And then, because the only way we're going to solve climate change is through institutional action.
Exactly, but this is the action of individuals.
Yeah, it's
so
the action
changing
of
the minds of 5
individuals.
individuals.
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
it
statistically is unlikely to make any difference to the future of the planet.
But you don't know who those 5 individuals are.
Sure. So if you happen to be very well connected, and the individuals that you know work for the UN, fine.
But all small movements have to start somewhere. And that, yes, of course, if Donald Trump isn't next to or around someone who's choosing not to have a child, or whoever the next US president is, but it has to start somewhere. And I think that this is an example of people actually taking something which is hugely serious, actually a good point.
I'm not sure they're actually taking action and also saying, rise up, you also have to not have children. I think it's actually just them saying, it's a really sorrowful state of affairs that they're saying, I no longer personally feel like I want to bring a child into the world. And it's not about what anyone else does, but this is now where I am. And they're saying they've been contacted by a lot of people who are saying, thank God that you've given voice to these concerns, because I'm also really worried about the planet and I feel that same way. So I don't think they're sort of going around saying, we've all got to take this action, we've all got to do this thing. I think you're just seeing more people having this fear and talking about it. And I think the thing about having children is that we're still very much a society and a culture where we celebrate child rearing and we celebrate, just look at Meghan Markle's ridiculous baby shower, for example. And I think a lot of people who have these fears, who maybe feel like they're being a bit of a freak or a bit of a weird, being like, am I being a bit nuts worrying about climate change? It's just a community of people saying, we're now really worried about this. But I do think you're seeing in the mainstream more people talking about it. So you've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who she made an Instagram post to her millions of followers where she said, is it now sort of fair enough to say I'm not going to have children because of climate change? That's where we are.
But the irony of this whole approach, it seems to me, and maybe it's because I'm a parent, is that at the point you become a mother or father, you're much more likely to care about future generations, frankly.
No, I don't think that's true at all.
Well, it seems true. I'm talking anecdotally of, the people that I know.
But you care about your children. I think the point about having children...
that's a real motivating factor, isn't it, to ensure the safety of the planet?
In a future apocalyptic scenario where we have fewer resources and everyone's fighting for them and the world is far less stable and fair, as a parent, you're going to be fiercely protective of your own kids, but you're not going to care about people in the rest of the world. You're not going to care about other people's kids. I do think there's an argument to say that the maternal and paternal instincts are extremely selfish and they probably go far against climate change and making the world a better place. And I also don't think it's true that just because you don't have children, you don't then care about the future of the planet. That doesn't make sense.
I wasn't saying that. I was just saying that based on my own personal experience. I mean, it's really interesting to hear your passionately put view. I'm just saying I disagree. I actually think if me or one of my friendship group ended up being a local councillor, by having kids, we'd be much more inclined to do things that protected younger people in the future than if we didn't. That's my instinct.
I also think that there's possibly a thing of my politics and the way that I see the world is taken almost completely from my parents. Some of it is related to my peers and stuff, but it is actually, I can see the ways that I think about things in relation to, and that might not be the case for everyone, but it certainly is the case for me. And I think that I would want future generations to care about the environment. And if I could have a direct effect on the future generations, which I would have by being a parent of them, maybe that is an argument for saying, yes, you can have children and you should try and do that as well. I can see both sides, basically.
There is actually an antinatalist political party in the UK which describes life as a dangerous lottery, and rather than an environmental position, they actually take a moral stance that it's wrong to bring children into the world, not knowing what horrors are going to be visited on those children. They have a policy of voluntary human extinction. Perhaps as a result of that, they haven't got too many votes so far, but after this week, perhaps their support will increase.
But they are distinct, aren't they? To this group, this group are not trying to get people to join them necessarily.
No, I think they're happy being a group unto themselves.
Yeah. I think that there is that really interesting question about whether calling it a birth strike does make it seem like it's meant to
end.
Yeah, well, to create change. It's like, a strike is meant to be a sort of short-term thing that is a protest and that generates change. But it does have that overlap with the idea that you're wanting to conserve resources. And I know there is, or at least seen reported, that the biggest single thing you can do as an individual to reduce carbon consumption, resource consumption, is to have one child fewer. Yeah.
But if it is a strike, if it is temporary, Felicity, isn't it just sort of a self-centred kind of publicity drive? It's just a way of, which is, I'm not saying it's not necessarily commendable. It's a way, as we're evidencing, of bringing attention to this issue, manipulating the media to talk about this because you're doing something interesting. But it's just a way of bringing this subject to the fore, and then 3 years later they might have kids if they want to. But nothing. But it's not a serious movement. It's a publicity stunt.
I don't understand why you're so cynical and sceptical of what they're trying to do.
I'm putting the view that possibly it is.
Why are they all going to have kids in 3 years' time?
No, I didn't say they all would. I said even if you were in the position of being someone who wanted to have children in the future, you couldn't you, for the next 2 years, say that you're on birth strike?
But also, people don't need to, people can be hypocritical. People are hypocritical throughout their entire lives. And I think that, the whole point of direct action and the whole point of, going on strike and trying to make a difference is that at that moment in time, that's what you think and that's what you believe.
If it's a real personal sacrifice.
I also think it's one of those issues like travelling or, flying around the world in planes or eating red meat. I think a lot of I think one of the main problems is that climate change is probably happening for middle-class people in their kind of conversation circles. And I think other people who are struggling even just to put food on the plate won't even be thinking about this. And I think that's something that some people haven't even considered. And like I said, in our sort of it's amazing to have children, let's all celebrate babies and have Meghan Markle-inspired baby showers. I think some people aren't even aware that having a child, is bad news for the planet. And so this is sort of just bringing awareness to the topic.
And Felicity, is this the week that has set that movement off?
I don't see why not. I mean, the birth strike movement has attracted nearly 150 people in 2 weeks. That isn't a huge number, but I think it could be growing, and I think you could see more articles and more people starting to talk about this.
Okay, I look forward to your next apocalyptic story next time you're on the show. And that is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. I am off to a Meghan Markle-inspired baby shower. My thanks to Felicity Capon, Holden Frith and Jamie Timson. You can live out the last days of humanity in style by subscribing to this show, The Week Unwrapped, on your podcast app of choice. And don't forget, you can hear what all this sounds like when it hasn't been edited by coming to Podcast Live on the 7th of April. Full details at podcastlive.com. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.